Hello, everyone. I'd like to give a warm welcome to all of you out there. As you know, my name is Renee, and you're watching Renee's Health Corner. And believe it or not, God really does care about your health. Last year, just about anywhere you looked, sickness and disease were on the rise. In the United States, someone had a heart attack every 40 seconds, and 1.4 million Americans are diagnosed with diabetes every year. And 1 in 2 people will get cancer in their lifetime. It was estimated there would be 1.9 million new cancer cases diagnosed and 609,360 cancer deaths in the United States last year in 2022. There's also a rise in the number of strokes per year. Gastrointestinal problems, arthritic conditions, lung conditions, multiple sclerosis, lupus, and a host of many other diseases. The question is, why? Well, many people believe God is to blame, but is that the case? In 3 John verse 2 in the Bible, we're told God wants us to prosper and be in health. So if God wants us to be in health, why is disease more rampant now than ever before? What's the problem? Well, I'd like to bring something to your mind for just a moment, something that many of us have learned in our lives at some point growing up, and that is we have many different types of laws in our world. We have civil law, the laws of physics, sanitary laws, the laws of gravity, etc. Now let's take the law of gravity for an example. Well, it's a well-known fact in most cases that what goes up must come down. Well, there's also other laws like natural laws, and when those laws are neglected in any way, the result is sickness and or disease. And over a period of time of neglecting natural laws, more severe diseases can set in, like cancer. So remember, all the information I share with you today is supported by the Bible, the spirit of prophecy, and or medical research and medical science. Now, I just ask that you have a listening ear and a sharing spirit so that what you learn, you could pass along with someone and possibly help them someday. Now, over the last quite a few videos, I've been covering the letter N on the subject of nutrition. This is a topic that is going to take several weeks to cover because there's many aspects covered under this one subject. Now, last time I talked about juicing, and today I'm going to tell you all about excitotoxins. In the Bible, in Proverbs 26:2, we're told the curse causeless shall not come. In other words, there's a reason for what happens. And in Job 29:16, it says, the cause which I knew not, I searched out. So we have to ask ourselves why. So if you have a headache, you don't just say, well, I'm going to take a pill. Find out why do you have that headache. And most likely, most common reasons is because you haven't drank enough water. In 1 Corinthians 10:31, it says, whether therefore ye eat or drink, or whatsoever ye do, do all to the glory of God. And 3 John 2 says, beloved, I wish above all things that thou mayest prosper and be in health, even as thy soul prospereth. Now, the Spirit of Prophecy says in Ministry of Healing, page 128, paragraph 1, too little attention is generally given to the preservation of health. It is far better to prevent disease than to know how to treat it when contracted. But it is the duty of every person, for his own sake and for the sake of humanity, to inform himself in regard to the laws of life and conscientiously to obey them. Education should be given on proper diet, we're told, in Counsels on Diet and Foods, page 406, paragraph 4. And LLM, page 545, says our food should be plain and free from all objectionable elements. But let us be careful that it is always palatable and good. And then Counsels on Diet and Foods, page 198, says the idea should never be given that it is of but little consequence what we eat. I love to learn new things, and I'm always willing to change our diet as the Holy Spirit leads me. I've had to make a lot of changes since I first learned about what I'm about to share with you, but I call it an honor and a privilege to follow God in His leading. And of course, it always makes one feel better. Okay, so what is an excitotoxin? Well, it's exactly what its name says. It's a toxin. It's a poison, and exciting is something A toxin is a poison, and exciting is something that excites you, and it causes excitation. An excitotoxin is basically any substance that causes brain cells to become very excited, and they start firing their impulses very rapidly, and they fire so rapidly that the cell will become exhausted and die. This occurs over a period of about an hour. So if you take some brain cells and put them in a petri dish and expose them to these excitotoxin substances, the cells start firing rapidly, but they look normal during that 1 hour period, and then they just suddenly die. This goes on in your brain if you take these excitotoxins into your body. It does the exact same thing. The cells in your brain become excited to the point that they will die, not all, just certain ones. Excitotoxins are a class of commonly used flavor enhancers that overstimulate the brain and are implicated in such diseases as Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, ADD, ADHD, memory and cognitive decline, as well as a host of other hormonal and neurological problems. Every medical journal that has anything to do with the brain and nervous system is filled with excitotoxins. Every research lab that deals with brain diseases, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, Lou Gehrig's, etc., the number one thing they talk about is excitotoxins. And despite all the money research labs spend to study the brain and diseases, hardly anyone has ever heard the word excitotoxins, and not by accident. It's because the number one source of it in our society is in our food by the industries that process our food, and they're adding it in very large amounts. Russell Blaylock is a neurosurgeon in Jackson, Mississippi. He has done extensive research into the effects of excitotoxins on the human brain, and what he has found is most shocking. Now, he's studied for many, many years. I think it's about 30, if I remember right. Dr. Blaylock was also warned that he would come under attack if he wrote this book called Excitotoxins, The Taste That Kills. Now, Ralph Nader, who's a consumer advocate, became interested at one point, and he was so browbeaten and destroyed by this industry, he said he would never touch it again, and he took on General Motors. He was warned that they would spend millions to keep him from getting his story out. So when Dr. Blaylock wrote the book, he made the argument so tight and well referenced that no one could refute it. He spent lots of time going through hundreds and hundreds of research papers and interviewing the person who coined the term excitotoxins, and no terrible thing happened. Well, except a couple of little things, but he got through them, and he got his book published. Now, even though there was enormous pressure to keep this story quiet, it got done. He's been on several radio programs as well as the 700 Club telling his story. Now, health stores won't touch this subject because they sell food with excitotoxins in it, and they call it, quote, health food. There's just too much pressure to keep the story quiet, so many companies and stores won't talk about it. Besides, they make money. Isn't money always the bottom reason about many things of why you're not told certain things? Now, I'm going to tell you the history of excitotoxins and how they came about. In Japan, they used a flavoring substance from a seaweed called kombu, and you dry it or grind it up, and it greatly enhances the taste of food. Well, they used that for thousands of years, but in 1908, a research chemist examined kombu and discovered the taste-enhancing compound was glutamate. So he made a friendship with Suzuki Spice Company and formed another company and manufactured MSG. By 1933, they were producing 10 million pounds and putting it in food. MSG, much higher concentration than was in kombu. During World War II, when the rations from Japanese soldiers were tasting better, it was found it was because of MSG. So they called a conference in 1948 and invited all the major food manufacturers like Libby, Campbell's, General Mills, etc. And the quartermasters told them of the incredible MSG taste they discovered, and the companies had problems with the taste of their food because it sat in packages and cans for a while. So it developed a tin taste in cans, and they found out that MSG would restore and magnify the taste in the food and make it better. If it's in soup, it makes it taste very good because it stimulates certain cells in the brain and tongue, so the companies added it and thought. But no one tested it. From 1948 to 1957, it was added to baby foods. Then in 1957, two ophthalmology residents did a research project studying a rare eye disease in humans, and they fed mice MSG. They found the MSG totally destroyed all the nerve cells in the retina of the eye. So they wrote it up in a report and put it in a journal, but it was an obscure ophthalmology journal, so hardly anyone read it. So it sat there for 10 years. Then, in 1968, a neuroscientist found it and thought it was a good way to study eye cells. He found out it not only destroyed eye cells, but critical cells in the brain as well. The parts of the brain that resembles things we see in strokes, low blood sugar, and Alzheimer's. So he thought all he had to do was tell the food manufacturers and they would take it out. But they said they didn't care because it solved their food taste problems, and it was a multi-million-dollar business by then. So he went to Congress and presented the evidence, and the food industry was at the hearing, especially those who made the baby foods, and they saw the handwriting on the wall. So they took the MSG out of the baby food voluntarily. Well, not really, because 10 more years, they still added it in different names. They disguised it. They even put it in toddler foods and baby formulas. Big lies. When it all started leaking out about the dangers of MSG, the industry's reaction was they had their scientists look at it and they told 3 lies. Lie number 1, they claimed their scientists looked at it and said, well, the doses in the experiments were high and you don't see babies and children eating that. They were just using tiny doses. The truth is, humans are more sensitive to the toxicity of MSG than any experimental animals. We are 5 times more sensitive than mice, 20 times more than a rhesus monkey, and newborns are 4 times more sensitive than adults. So, if a woman is pregnant and eating MSG food, it goes to baby and damages the baby's brain because their brain enzymes that normally protect them are immature and have not formed yet. And the blood-brain barrier is immature and not completely formed yet. Now, infant formula MSG added is called casein hydroslates in the formula. So that's what it says on the label. Casein, C-A-S-E-I-N, hydroslates. And that's Hydrolysates. Maybe I'm pronouncing that wrong. Anyway, in the formula, that's what it says. So babies are consuming very large quantities of free glutamate. Okay, lie number 2. Even if it does enter the bloodstream, the brain has a protective system called blood-brain barrier that keeps certain toxins from your blood from entering into your brain, and it would keep the glutamate out and not damage the brain. The truth? It does not protect the brain. There are certain areas of the brain where there's no blood-brain barriers. So anything in the blood goes to the brain. For instance, the pituitary gland. If there's a high enough amount of glutamate in the blood, it will penetrate the blood-brain barrier. Look how many people have had strokes and mini strokes, and they don't even know it. It occurs in silent areas of the brain and opens up the blood-brain barrier, and whatever is in your blood will go through there. Now, here's some frequent causes of blood-brain barrier disruption. Brain surgery, certain drugs, diabetes, head injuries, heat strokes, high fevers, hypertension, which is high blood pressure, infections, iridation, which is x-rays on your head, multiple sclerosis, severe hypoglycemia, and strokes and mini strokes. Now, when we eat MSG, it makes it worse. And it lasts days or weeks after. Your doctor will probably say it's a natural course of disease, but it is not. It's actually poisoning them. Most doctors say to use NutraSweet, but that opens up the blood-brain barrier and then they get in all those toxins. Okay, lie number 3. Someone said if you eat lots of sugar and carbs, it will protect you. Truth? There was an experiment done by the person who says MSG is safe, and he fed the animals carbs and found out they blocked the toxicity. But he was wrong. The report the person wrote up said if you take high amounts of refined carbs, it will reduce toxicity, but will still cause brain damage. He said also that you had to eat 15 packages of sugar to get protection per meal. So his argument fell to the wayside. Now, there is a list of disguised names for MSG, and they said they will change the name so the public doesn't recognize it. Most frequently, it's called hydrolyzed vegetable protein, and it's in many soups and foods and even fake meats that are sold at stores and health food stores. When you hydrolyze a protein, what you do is break it down and release its amino acids, and one of them is glutamate and another one is aspartame. What are the names of some of these other agents? Well, when you read labels, the two most common names to look for MSG and aspartame. But just because the label says something is MSG free doesn't mean it's excitotoxin free. So I'm going to give you some names to look for on your labels when you shop so you won't drop. Okay, additives that always contain MSG are monosodium glutamate, hydrolyzed vegetable protein, hydrolyzed protein, hydrolyzed plant protein extract, sodium caseinate, calcium caseinate, yeast extract, textured protein, autolyzed yeast, hydrolyzed oat flour. Now, additives that frequently contain MSG are malt extract, malt flavoring, bouillon broth, stock flavoring, natural beef or chicken flavoring, seasoning, and spices. Now, additives that may contain MSG or other excitotoxins are carrageenan enzymes, soy protein concentrate, soy protein isolate, whey, and protein concentrate. There are more than 70 of these used in processed foods, including many vegetarian foods and seasonings. Did you know that even nutritional yeast flakes, chicken and beef seasonings, and all the fake meats you buy at the ABC or health food stores or wherever in TVPs, and Bragg's liquid aminos are also included in this list? I was shocked when I found that out. I spent some time reading labels in my home and had to throw away things and return what I could to the grocery store. Now, foods will say no MSG, but they will contain 3 or 4 of the names I just mentioned. And the FDA allows it because the law says only if it's 99% pure MSG do they have to put it on the label. So it can be 98% and they don't even have to put it on the label. They can use one of the other names as well. So you're not protected when it says no MSG, and the people in restaurants don't even know it. Now, there's some foods that are especially high in excitotoxins, and those are your gravies and salad dressings and soups. Campbell's is the worst. There can be as many as 4 different excitotoxins in one can of soup. And those cans aren't very big either. And now what do they do when you're sick or when you're in the hospital and you have surgery? They give you soup. It's making you worse. What about diet foods? When you remove fat, and when you do that, you remove the taste. So they put in MSG to make it taste good, and they also put it in drinks. Now, liquid amino acid preparations, anytime you break down a protein to its free amino acid, you get a high concentration of excitotoxins. But the company will lie and say that the MS is the salt and sodium is not the problem. It's the G, the glutamate. Now, here's some diseases and disorders associated with excitotoxins. You have Lyme disease, AIDS, any kind of viral infection, immune suppression, episodic violence, learning disorders, hypoglycemic brain damage, migraine headaches, AIDS, dementia, seizures, degenerative brain disorders like Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, dementia, ALS, hepatic encephalopathy. It's encephalopathy, encephalopathy. What makes the difference in the disease is exciting producing effect that it gives in the different tissues. Now, if you get a brain injury, most of the damage doesn't happen at the time of the injury. Sometimes it can, but usually not. And it's delayed several hours. So now they discovered its excitotoxicity. If the brain is injured, it releases glutamate from itself because normally glutamate is a transmitter in the brain. It's the most common transmitter in the brain, but very carefully regulated when injured, it can regulate and build up a high level in the brain and produces the delayed injury. But that frequently results in severe neurological or injury or even death. So now when you have a stroke, you block off a blood vessel to the brain. It isn't lack of blood supply to the brain that causes the worst part of the stroke. It just kills a tiny core brain tissue, and around that tiny core, the brain starts secreting enormous amounts of excitotoxins, and that's what causes the devastating aspects of a stroke. If we block those excitotoxins, the stroke is less, and we can do that with something God created called food. The original diet of fruits, nuts, grains, and vegetables, which were added later. The vegetables were added after sin, but that's a whole nother topic. Anyway, glutamate kills brain cells. It attaches to the brain cells and sends signals down to the nerve cells, similar to what happens in cancer and arthritis. Excitotoxins produce free radicals that destroy brain cells, and brain cells are smart. God made them that way. So why add glutamate to your food and let it in your brain? You don't need it. Now here's how excitotoxins can affect your nervous system. It can alter the development of brain pathways. It can destroy certain groups of neurons. Very important part of the brain. In subtoxic doses, it can alter physiology. It can stimulate free radical generation and lipid peroxidation. It impairs glucose entry into the brain, depends on for its energy supply. Now, what do excitotoxins do when they get in our system? Well, they can alter how the brain forms, and during the last trimester, brain forms in the womb, which is very sensitive to glutamate. It can destroy brain cells or make them even grow in the wrong direction. Excitotoxins produce free radicals that destroy brain cells. Now, MSG in babies, animals, organ weights are smaller, ovaries, kidney, spleen, obese similar to what we see in human children now and adults, impossible to diet or exercise it off because it alters the part of the brain that has to do with obesity. Males exposed can be infertile, and females can be infertile too. Associated with rage, overt aggression, and antisocial behavior, impaired cardiovascular responsiveness, like when you run, high triglycerides, cholesterol, and VLDL, which is very low density, life of protein. It puts at risk for heart attacks, abnormal hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. This is in every animal species, not just a mouse. Chickens, horses, sheep, every animal has produced the same thing. This is a toxin, and everybody is affected by it. It's not an allergy or sensitivity, it's a toxin, and everyone is sensitive to it. The effects are produced silently. You will pay the price and see the effects later. Now, glutamate can permanently alter how the connection and pathways are formed and connected in your brain. So very critical during the last 3 months of pregnancy and the first 4 years of a child's life. Endocrine affects the MSG exposure in neonates. Infertile child exposed as a baby or toddler. When he's older, he can't reproduce or he'll have trouble with menstrual cycle and more. She will. It can trace all the way back to MSG. There's proof it's connected to what the child's mother ate when she was pregnant. Small doses can cause early onset of puberty, loss of growth hormone pulsation. MSG exposure can cause faulty development of hypothalamic pathways and altered endocrine control, disturbances in sexual behavior. The hypothalamus of brain and functions. The hypothalamus is the most important part of the brain. It's the size of a fingernail, your little one. You can't live without one. It controls and regulates the endocrine glands. It controls your sleep and wake cycles. It controls your hunger, when to eat and when not to. Origin of autonomic system control, which is your heartbeat and more. Regulation of immunity, more likely to get cancer, not recover. Major limbic system integration areas and emotions, fear, anger, love, compassion, empathy. If exposed as a baby to too much MSG, it can affect your immune system. Studying the brain intensely for 70 years, nothing in the body that even approaches the complexity of the brain. Excitotoxins in food and intellectual development. MSG-exposed babies are tested and they are intellectually impaired or retarded. Animals that were pregnant and exposed to MSG, they tested their offspring and they looked normal at first, but when tested for more complex problems, animals were severely impaired. Means child born after exposed to MSG goes to school, seems normal, then when high school, they're impaired. Who's going to say it's MSG when they don't want this story out? Measured the neurotransmitters in the brain in the offspring, they found 80% reduction in the frontal lobe part of the brain, and it's vital for learning and memory, and to pay attention and concentrate, and if you can't do that, you won't remember. So for adults, increased risk of the brain, high content of polyunsaturated fats, high oxygen content, brain iron levels increase with aging, especially with neurodegenerative diseases. Aged brain cells are more sensitive to free radical damage, even with normal antioxidant levels. When the brain ages, there's decreased receptor signal transduction. There's a loss of central receptor activity in hippocampus and oxidative damage to microvessels, reduce antioxidant defenses, increase free iron and decrease ferritin, increased lipid peroxidation, increased DNA oxidative injury, elevated protein and carbonyl products. Now there's a lot of factors that cause increased excitotoxicity. Immaturity of the brain, it makes you 4 times more sensitive. Energy deficits, like low blood sugar and not eating properly and dieting and disorder and have lack of energy in your brain cell, it'll magnify it as much as 100-fold. Magnesium deficiency is very common in our country too. 75% of people are deficient in this. And if you remove magnesium from a person, they will have a seizure and go into a coma. And if given magnesium in time, they can go back to normal. Anyway, what should we do if excitotoxins get in our system? What do excitotoxins do when they get in our system? Well, they can alter how our brain forms. And during the last trimester in pregnancy is when the brain forms in the mother's womb. So very sensitive to glutamate, it can destroy the brain cells or make them grow in the wrong direction. The weight and size of the baby when born affects its metabolism for the rest of its life if the mother was eating MSG and excitotoxins. Alzheimer's disease, excessive excitotoxicity in the brain, what triggers that is a different story. Loss of energy in the brain precedes Alzheimer's by as much as a decade. You can scan the brain of people and find out that these areas that are going to be affected are already losing their energy supply, even though they're perfectly normal at the time. 10 years later, they come down with Alzheimer's. And when you lose that energy, you magnify the excitotoxic process. Eating MSG does not cause Alzheimer's. It's more complex than that, but it can be significantly aggravated by MSG because Alzheimer's disease damages the blood-brain barrier. You lose your barrier, low energy, cells are damaged by free radicals, so you're at a lot more risk. Now, Parkinson's disease, the first thing you see is a loss of substance called glutathione, a molecule that protects you against free radicals. Lost decades before you get the disease, and also increased nuclear DNA damage. Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, and ALS people all have low vitamins in their brain, very low magnesium, high levels of free radicals, minerals, low levels of cellular energy, high levels of oxidation in their cells, high in calcium like Tums. When older people, when older cells, have more difficulty keeping calcium out, you don't want to flood the brain with more calcium because it speeds the process up. Now, how does glucose get into the brain? Well, it attaches to protein and that carries it into your brain. The brain is highly dependent on glucose for energy. It uses a glucose transporter to carry glucose into the brain, and glutamate transporter is impaired. Number 1, aging. Number 2, Alzheimer's. Number 3, by glutamate itself. So under such conditions, the brain can be hypoglycemic despite a normal blood sugar. Now, people have to know this. It's in all the foods, and we need to go back to eating the way God intended for us to eat, the original diet, plain and simple, Genesis 1:29, plus vegetables, because we need those since sin. Check your labels. If the ingredients listed include any of the things I mentioned, that product may pose hazards to your brain and overall physical and mental health. Basically, if all your food is homemade, the better off you'll be. This is a very serious matter. It's not a far-fetched scare tactic. The scientific validation of the problem is extensive and compelling. Your brain health and your ability to think, memorize, learn, and recall may be at risk. For more information on excitotoxins, I strongly recommend the book by Dr. Russell Blaylock called Excitotoxins, The Taste That Kills. Well, that's our time for today. I hope that what you learn will be a blessing to you and to your family. And until we meet again, may the good Lord bless and keep you throughout the new week. And remember, God loves you and He wants you to be in health. So eat that which is good.